In the quaint town of Brooksville, nestled in the heart of New England, lived Karen Whitman, a woman in her late 40s known for her meticulous nature and unwavering adherence to rules. Her days were a series of routines, each meticulously planned and executed. Karen took pride in her community involvement, often positioning herself as the unofficial overseer of neighborhood affairs. One crisp autumn afternoon, as the golden leaves danced in the gentle breeze, Karen decided to visit the local park, a serene enclave where she often sought solace. As she approached her favorite bench, she noticed a young black girl, perhaps in her late teens, sitting there with a sketch pad, her fingers deftly bringing images to life. The girl's presence was unfamiliar, and in Karen's world, unfamiliarity often bred suspicion. Karen's eyes narrowed as she observed the girl. The town had recently experienced a series of minor vandalisms, graffiti on walls, littering in the park, and Karen had taken it upon herself to be vigilant. The sight of the girl, engrossed in her art, triggered Karen's internal alarm. She approached with measured steps, her voice carrying the authority she believed she possessed. "Excuse me," Karen began, her tone sharp. "May I ask what you're doing here?" The girl looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "I'm just drawing," she replied softly, lifting her sketch pad to reveal a beautifully detailed rendering of the park's landscape. Karen glanced at the drawing, momentarily taken aback by its intricacy. But her suspicion remained unshaken. "Do you live around here?" she pressed. The girl hesitated, a flicker of discomfort crossing her face. "I'm visiting my father," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. To Karen, the response was evasive, further fueling her doubts. She had never seen this girl before, and in her mind, that was reason enough to question her intentions. Without another word, Karen turned on her heel and marched away, her mind racing. Minutes later, Karen stood at the edge of the park, her phone pressed to her ear. She had dialed the local police station, her voice laced with urgency. "Yes, this is Karen Whitman. I'm at Brooksville Park, and there's a suspicious individual here. A young black girl. I think she might be involved in the recent vandalisms. Could you send someone over to check?" As she ended the call, Karen felt a sense of righteousness wash over her. She believed she was protecting her community, upholding the standards she held dear. Little did she know, her actions were about to set off a chain of events that would challenge her perceptions and force her to confront the very biases she refused to acknowledge. Within moments, the distant wail of sirens pierced the tranquil afternoon, drawing the attention of park-goers. Karen watched as a police cruiser pulled up, and two officers stepped out, their expressions serious. They approached the young girl, who looked up in confusion, her sketch pad still resting on her lap. Karen observed from a distance, her arms crossed over her chest. She expected the officers to question the girl, perhaps escort her away. But what happened next was beyond anything she could have anticipated. One of the officers, a tall man with a stern demeanor, glanced at the sketch pad and then back at the girl. Recognition flickered in his eyes, and his posture relaxed. "Miss Johnson," he said, his tone shifting to one of respect, "is everything all right here?" The girl nodded, her expression a mix of relief and confusion. "Yes, Officer Daniels, I was just drawing." Karen's brow furrowed as she watched the interaction. How did this girl know the officer? And why was he addressing her with such familiarity? Before she could process further, the second officer, a woman with a kind face, turned towards Karen. "Ma'am, did you call in a report about this young lady?" Karen straightened, her sense of authority returning. "Yes, I did. I found her presence here suspicious, given the recent incidents in town." The female officer exchanged a glance with her partner before looking back at Karen. "Ma'am, this is Maya Johnson, the daughter of our police chief. She's not involved in any wrongdoing." The words hit Karen like a physical blow. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound emerged. The realization of her mistake, of her unfounded assumptions, crashed over her like a tidal wave. Maya stood up, her sketchpad clutched to her chest. She looked at Karen, her eyes reflecting a mixture of hurt and disappointment. Without a word, she turned and walked away, the officers following her, leaving Karen standing alone, grappling with the weight of her actions. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Karen remained rooted to the spot, her mind a whirlwind of regret and self-reproach. She had acted on prejudice, on baseless fears, and in doing so, had wronged an innocent girl. The path to redemption, she realized, would be long and arduous, but it was a journey she knew she had to undertake. And so, with a heavy heart and a newfound resolve, Karen took her first step towards making amends, unaware of the challenges and revelations that lay ahead. The air was heavy in Karen Whitman's living room that evening. Outside, the autumn wind rustled the branches of the maple trees, but inside, the only sounds were the ticking of the grandfather clock and the faint hum of the refrigerator. Karen sat alone at her kitchen table, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm cup of tea she had long forgotten. The police chief's daughter. The words echoed in her mind like a cruel refrain. How had she misread the situation so completely? Her intentions had been to protect her community, but now she felt exposed, like every small imperfection within her was laid bare. She had made a fool of herself, and worse, she had hurt someone innocent. Her phone buzzed on the counter, breaking the silence. A message from her neighbor, Donna. "Karen, I heard what happened at the park. I'm sure you meant well, but maybe it's time to take a step back from neighborhood watch." Karen frowned. Donna's words, though softened with courtesy, carried a clear message. Others were talking. In a town as small as Brooksville, rumors spread faster than wildfire. During the next morning, Karen was determined to restore some semblance of normalcy. She dressed in her usual pressed blouse and cardigan, tied her hair into a neat bun, and grabbed her shopping list for the farmer's market. Walking through the town square, she noticed a shift in the atmosphere. Averted gazes, quiet whispers. It was subtle, but Karen felt it. As she browsed through a stand of fresh apples, she overheard two teenage girls talking nearby. Can you believe she called the cops on Maya? What was she even thinking? Yeah, my dad said Chief Johnson was furious. I'd be too. Poor Maya. Karen's face flushed red, and her hands fumbled with the apples. She quickly paid for her purchase and left the market, her chest tight. By afternoon, Karen found herself pacing her living room, restless. The encounter at the market weighed on her. She didn't like how people were seeing her now, not as the helpful, law-abiding citizen she always considered herself to be, but as someone prejudiced and unreasonable. But deep down, the nagging voice of her conscience told her they weren't entirely wrong. Karen sat down and pulled out her laptop. She typed Maya Johnson Brooksville into the search bar, curious. A few links appeared, including an article from the local newspaper titled Art Competition Winner, Brooksville's Maya Johnson. She clicked on it. The article described Maya as a talented artist, having won first prize in a statewide youth art competition. It included a photo of her standing next to her father, Chief Thomas Johnson, smiling proudly as she held her award. Karen stared at the screen. The girl she had accused yesterday was a prodigy, a child of the very man responsible for keeping Brooksville safe. Shame settled deep in her bones. By late afternoon, Karen made a decision she knew would take all her courage. She needed to apologize, not just for her sake, but for Maya's. She drove to the Brooksville Police Department, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the steering wheel. The small building stood tall in the middle of town, its brick facade sturdy and intimidating. Inside, the front desk officer looked up as Karen entered. "Can I help you?" he asked politely. "I'd like to speak with Chief Johnson," Karen replied, her voice steady. The officer raised an eyebrow but picked up the phone and spoke briefly before gesturing for her to sit. Karen's heart pounded as she waited. A few minutes later, the door to the back office opened, and Chief Thomas Johnson stepped out. He was a tall, imposing man in his early 50s, with sharp eyes and a strong, quiet presence. Karen stood quickly. "Chief Johnson," she began nervously, I wanted to speak with you." He crossed his arms and studied her carefully, his expression unreadable. "You're Karen Whitman, right?" "Yes," she said, her throat dry. I wanted to apologize." He raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "I made a terrible mistake yesterday," Karen continued, her voice wavering. "When I saw Maya at the park, I assumed the worst. I didn't stop to think. I let my own biases cloud my judgment, and I hurt her. And you." For a moment, silence stretched between them. Karen braced herself, expecting anger, a sharp rebuke. Instead, Chief Johnson sighed, his expression softening just slightly. "Mrs. Whitman, do you know how many calls we get about suspicious individuals in this town who are just minding their own business?" Karen looked down, ashamed. He continued, "I'm not saying you meant harm, but what you did, it happens too often to people who look like Maya. She's a good kid, Mrs. Whitman. You didn't just make her feel unwelcome. You made her feel like she didn't belong in her own town." The words hit Karen harder than she expected. She blinked back tears, nodding. "I know, I'm so sorry, Chief Johnson. I want to make it right. If there's anything I can do—" Chief Johnson studied her for a long moment before speaking. "You should apologize to Maya herself. She'll be at the Community Arts Center tomorrow, working on a new project." Karen swallowed hard, but nodded. "I'll be there." As she left the station, her heart felt heavy but resolute. She had taken the first step, but she knew the hardest part was yet to come. "Say to you." That night, Karen lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. Her conversation with Chief Johnson replayed in her mind over and over again. She realized how much she had to learn about her own blind spots. For years, she had believed herself to be fair, objective, a pillar of her community. But now, cracks were beginning to show in that image. And yet, there was hope. Tomorrow she would face Maya and try to make amends, not just with words, but with actions. The next chapter of her life was beginning, and for the first time in years, Karen felt something shift within her. She wasn't sure if Maya would forgive her or even listen to her, but she owed it to the girl and to herself to try. Karen woke early the next morning. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a faint golden glow through her bedroom window, but the weight of what lay ahead kept her from enjoying its warmth. Her heart felt tight with apprehension as she prepared for the day. Facing Maya wouldn't be easy, apologizing rarely was, but Karen knew it was necessary. She stood in front of the mirror, fixing her cardigan and brushing down her blouse, as though presenting herself neatly might erase the messy mistakes of the day before. "You can do this," she whispered to her reflection, though she wasn't entirely sure she believed it. Deepening, the Brooksville Community Arts Center was housed in a renovated brick building just off Main Street. Its large sunlit windows made it feel open and welcoming, a creative haven for aspiring artists. As Karen parked her car and approached the entrance, she could already hear faint echoes of voices and the scraping of chairs inside. Her palms felt clammy, and she clenched and unclenched them as she stepped through the door. The main room was spacious and lined with easels, paint palettes, and canvases in various stages of completion. Several teenagers were scattered around the room, chatting and working on their art. It didn't take Karen long to spot Maya in the far corner, sitting quietly at a table near the windows. Her head was tilted down, focused on the sketch pad in front of her. Sunlight bathed her in a golden hue, highlighting the intense concentration on her face. Karen's throat tightened. For a moment, she considered turning around and walking back out the door. What if Maya didn't want to hear her apology? What if it only made things worse? But she remembered Chief Johnson's words. You made her feel like she didn't belong in her own town. Drawing a deep breath, Karen crossed the room. Maya noticed her approach, but didn't look up right away. Her pencil moved with precision, the tip scratching lightly against the paper. Karen paused a few feet away, gathering her courage. Maya? Karen's voice wavered slightly. The girl glanced up, her dark brown eyes meeting Karen's with wary curiosity. Hi, she said softly. Karen's heart pounded in her chest. I'm Karen Whitman, from the park. Maya blinked, her expression shifting to guarded. She said nothing, her pencil still hovering above the page. I wanted to say I'm sorry, Karen continued, her voice more earnest now. For what I did, for calling the police on you when you were doing nothing wrong. I assumed things I shouldn't have assumed, and I hurt you. Maya placed her pencil down, folding her arms across the table. Her face remained unreadable. Why'd you do it? She asked quietly. The question caught Karen off guard. She had prepared herself to apologize, but not to explain. She opened her mouth, but the words didn't come easily. I think I let my fears get the best of me, Karen admitted after a moment, her voice barely above a whisper. When I saw you there, I didn't see you. I saw what I thought was trouble. I let my own ignorance cloud my judgment, and that was wrong. You didn't deserve that. Maya studied Karen carefully, as if weighing the sincerity of her words. Finally, she sighed and looked down at her sketch pad. People do that a lot, you know, she said, her voice tinged with sadness. They look at me and think I'm up to something, even when I'm not. Karen felt her heart sink. I'm so sorry, she repeated, the words almost catching in her throat. I wish I could take it back. I really do. For a long moment, there was silence between them. Karen wondered if Maya would tell her to leave, if the bridge she was trying to rebuild had already been burned. But then, Maya surprised her. She picked up her sketch pad, turned it around, and held it up for Karen to see. It was a drawing of the park, a detailed, beautiful sketch of the same bench where Karen had confronted her. In the background, the trees swayed gently and sunlight filtered through the branches. But in the center of the bench was a shadowy figure, small, faint, almost ghost-like. That's how I felt yesterday, Maya said softly. Like I didn't belong, like I was just a shadow. Karen's breath caught in her throat. She stared at the drawing, its quiet pain far more eloquent than any words could have been. I didn't mean to make you feel that way, Karen whispered. I can't change what I did, but I want to make things right, if you'll let me. Maya tilted her head slightly, considering Karen's words. How? Karen hadn't thought that far ahead. Her apology had been her focus, but now she realized words weren't enough. She needed to show Maya and herself that she could do better. Well, I don't know yet, Karen admitted honestly, but I'm willing to learn. I want to do something that helps, not hurts. Maya didn't say anything for a moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. Okay, Karen blinked, surprised. Okay? You can start by coming here, Maya said, gesturing to the art center. We're doing a project for the community, murals for the park. You can help us. Karen hesitated. Me? I'm not much of an artist. Maya shrugged. You don't have to be. Just show up. Karen smiled faintly, feeling an unfamiliar warmth spread through her chest. All right, I'll be here. That afternoon, as Karen walked back to her car, she felt lighter than she had in days. The apology had been harder than she expected, but Maya had given her something she hadn't realized she needed, a chance to do better. The next step, Karen knew, was proving herself. She had taken the first step toward rebuilding the trust she had broken, but it was just the beginning. As she drove through town, she noticed the park in the distance, its familiar bench nestled beneath the golden trees. For the first time in a long time, Karen saw it differently. She didn't see a place of suspicion, of judgment. She saw an opportunity for change. And this time, she wouldn't let it pass her by. The next morning, Karen found herself standing at the entrance of the Brooksville Community Arts Center once again. Unlike the day before, her nerves weren't as raw. Maya's invitation had been unexpected, and though the path forward was unclear, Karen felt a strange sense of determination. This was no longer about just apologizing. It was about earning back the trust she had shattered, piece by piece, brushstroke by brushstroke. As Karen walked inside, the familiar scent of paint and pencil shavings greeted her. The large room buzzed with soft conversation and the occasional scrape of chairs on the wooden floor. Karen spotted Maya right away, sitting with a group of kids her age. Today, she seemed more at ease, chatting with the others as they prepped their supplies. Karen hesitated, suddenly aware of her age and presence in a room full of teenagers. What am I even doing here? She wondered. Then Maya glanced up and noticed her. A small, polite nod was all Karen received, but it was enough to steady her nerves. Taking a deep breath, she stepped forward. "Mrs. Whitman, right?" A voice called from her left. Karen turned to see a woman in her 40s walking toward her, wearing a paint-streaked apron and a warm smile. Her curly hair was pulled back into a messy bun, and her hands were smudged with blue paint. "Yes," Karen said, offering a small smile. "Karen Whitman." "I'm Janet Brooks," the woman said, extending her hand. "I run the art center." "Maya told me you'd be joining us today." Karen blinked, surprised. "She did?" Janet nodded. "She said you wanted to help with the park mural project." "I think that's great." Karen relaxed slightly. "I'm not much of an artist," she admitted. Janet chuckled. "Trust me, most of us aren't either. It's not about creating perfect art. It's about creating something meaningful. Come on, I'll show you what we're working on." And the back of the art center was set up as a workspace for the mural project. Long tables held jars of paint, brushes, sponges, and sketches. Karen looked around, taking in the energy of the group. Kids and teens alike bent over drawings, brainstorming ideas, their excitement evident in every motion. "We're creating 3 murals for the park," Janet explained. "Each one will represent a theme: belonging, growth, and community. Maya's leading the first one, belonging." Karen's gaze shifted to Maya, who was standing in front of a large wooden board propped against the wall. She was sketching outlines, her pencil moving gracefully, lost in thought. The mural design was still in its early stages, but Karen could already see figures taking shape, hands reaching for each other, trees intertwined, birds soaring above a town. "It's beautiful," Karen murmured. "She's got talent, doesn't she?" Janet said with a smile. "Maya's been coming here since she was 10. This place is like a second home for her." Karen swallowed hard. The weight of yesterday's actions returned to her, though not as crushing as before. Now it came with clarity. This was what she almost ruined for Maya, a place where she felt safe, welcome, and seen. "You can start by helping with the base coat," Janet said, handing Karen a paintbrush and a can of primer. "It's the first layer we need before the real painting begins. Simple, I promise." Karen nodded, rolling up her sleeves. "I can do that." For the next hour, Karen worked quietly, rolling the white primer paint across the wood panels. The repetitive motion was calming, and though her hands ached slightly, she didn't complain. Around her, the kids buzzed with energy, laughing and sharing ideas as they worked. Occasionally, Karen would glance at Maya, who seemed so focused, so confident in her role as a leader. It amazed Karen how someone so young could command such respect without demanding it. Maya had a quiet strength, one that Karen couldn't help but admire. At one point, Maya approached her, holding a small sketch pad. "You missed a spot," she said, pointing to a corner Karen had overlooked. Karen looked up, startled, then laughed softly. "You're right, good eye." Maya shrugged. I'm an artist. I notice details. Karen paused, setting down her brush. Thank you for letting me be here today, Maya. I know I don't deserve it, but I really appreciate the chance. Maya regarded her for a moment, her expression unreadable. You're here, she said simply, before walking back to her spot. Karen let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. You're here. Somehow, those two words carried more meaning than any long-winded acceptance ever could. By the end of the day, the base coats were finished and the group was cleaning up. Karen's arms were sore. Her sweater had specks of white paint all over it, but for the first time in days, she felt lighter. Janet clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. All right, great work today, everyone. Tomorrow, we'll start laying out the sketches on the panels. Rest up. As the kids began filing out, Maya walked past Karen, tucking her sketch pad into her bag. See you tomorrow? She asked casually. Karen blinked. You want me to come back? Maya shrugged, a small smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. You did all right today. We'll need help with the next part. Karen couldn't help but smile, her chest swelling with gratitude. I'll be here. Maya nodded and walked out the door, leaving Karen standing there, her heart unexpectedly full. That evening, as Karen sat at her kitchen table sipping tea, she reflected on the day. She had expected the art center to be a place of paint and brushes, but it was so much more. It was a place of connection, of expression, of belonging. And for the first time in a long while, Karen realized she wasn't just trying to fix her mistake for Maya's sake. She was learning to become a better version of herself. Tomorrow would bring more challenges, more moments of discomfort. But Karen was ready. She would show up, again and again, until her actions spoke louder than her past. As she set down her mug and looked out the window at the quiet night, she felt something unfamiliar, yet welcome, stirring inside her. Hope. The next morning, Karen arrived at the Brooksville Community Arts Center 15 minutes early. She clutched a thermos of coffee in her hand and stared at the entrance, gathering her thoughts. The parking lot was still empty, and a chill in the autumn air nipped at her cheeks. She thought of the day ahead, the long hours of painting, and the people she was trying to earn trust from, especially Maya. Yesterday had been a small step, but the path to redemption was far from finished. You're early. The voice startled Karen, and she turned to see Maya standing a few feet away, her bag slung over one shoulder, sketchpad in hand. The teen wore a thick hoodie, her curls spilling out around her face, and regarded Karen with mild surprise. Karen smiled sheepishly. Old habits die hard, I guess. I've always been the early bird. Maya didn't respond right away. She just studied Karen with that same careful gaze she seemed to reserve for everyone. All right, come on. Janet'll let us in. Together, they made their way to the door. Janet arrived a few minutes later, greeting both of them with a wide smile as she unlocked the art center. The next phase of the mural project was sketching out the design on the panels. Janet explained that they would use light pencils to trace the outlines before applying any paint. Karen stood awkwardly at first, feeling out of place as Maya and the other kids moved with purpose, gathering supplies and sharing ideas. Here, Janet said, handing Karen a charcoal pencil. You can help Maya with the outlining on this panel. Karen's eyes widened. Me? Janet grinned. Yes, you. Don't worry, it's just following lines. Maya will guide you. Karen turned nervously toward Maya, who was kneeling on the floor by one of the large panels. Maya looked up at her and sighed. You don't have to be scared. It's just a pencil, not a sword. Karen chuckled, despite herself. All right, I'll give it a try. She lowered herself carefully to the floor, feeling her knees protest, and watched as Maya began outlining a large tree that stretched from the bottom of the panel to the top. Just trace where I've already drawn, Maya instructed, handing Karen a second pencil. Karen nodded and started working, her strokes clumsy at first. She was terrified of ruining the design, but Maya kept a steady hand and calm demeanor. "Slow down," Maya said at one point. "You're not racing." Karen smiled apologetically and adjusted her pace. As the minutes passed, she found herself settling into the rhythm of it. The room buzzed with soft chatter and the occasional joke from the other kids, but Maya worked mostly in silence. At one point, Karen glanced at the tree design and asked, "What's the story behind this mural?" Maya paused, her pencil hovering over the panel. "It's about belonging," she said quietly. "The tree represents people, how we're all connected, like branches and roots. Even when we grow in different directions, we're still part of the same whole." Karen stared at the sketch, letting Maya's words sink in. It was such a simple yet profound metaphor, and it struck a chord deep within her. "That's beautiful," Karen said softly. "You're very wise for your age, you know." Maya shrugged, but a faint smile appeared on her face. "I just see things differently when I draw." Karen hesitated, then added, "I hope one day you'll feel like this town is as much yours as anyone else's. You deserve that." Maya's pencil stilled, and she looked at Karen with an expression that was hard to read. For a moment, Karen feared she'd said too much. "I hope so too," Maya finally replied, before turning back to her work. By lunchtime, the outlines for the first mural were nearly complete. Karen's back ached, her hands were stained with charcoal, and yet she felt a quiet sense of satisfaction she hadn't experienced in years. As everyone gathered for a break, Janet brought out sandwiches and bottles of water. Karen found herself sitting across from Maya at one of the tables, unsure whether to speak or keep quiet. "You did all right today," Maya said suddenly, breaking the silence. Karen blinked. "I did?" Maya nodded, chewing her sandwich. "You didn't mess up the outlines, so that's something." Karen laughed, relieved. "Well, I had a good teacher." Maya rolled her eyes but smiled faintly. "You're really trying, huh?" Karen met her gaze and nodded earnestly. "I am. I know I messed up, badly, and I don't expect you to forgive me right away. But I want to be better, Maya. I want to do better." Maya regarded her for a long moment, her expression unreadable. Finally, she shrugged. "Good. Just don't quit halfway." "I won't," Karen promised. That afternoon, they began adding the first layers of paint to the mural. Karen watched in awe as Maya worked, her brush moving effortlessly across the panel as she brought the tree to life. The roots and branches stretched out, blending into subtle silhouettes of people and hands reaching for one another. "You really are talented," Karen said, unable to hold back the admiration in her voice. Maya didn't look up from her work, but replied quietly, "Thanks." Karen spent the next few hours helping fill in the background colors, carefully following Maya's directions. With each stroke of paint, she felt a growing sense of connection to the mural, to Maya, and perhaps even to herself. For years, Karen had lived in a bubble, certain of her own righteousness, her own goodness. But it had taken this mistake, this humbling experience, to make her realize how blind she'd been. The mural was more than just art. It was a symbol of connection, of healing, of belonging. And in helping Maya bring it to life, Karen felt like she was beginning to find her own place within it. By the time the day ended, the mural had begun to take shape. The tree's outlines were bold and proud, the background a soft gradient of blues and greens that hinted at a calm sky. Karen stood back, staring at their progress, and felt something stir deep in her chest. "It's beautiful," she murmured. Maya stood beside her, wiping her hands on a rag. "It's getting there." Karen glanced at her and smiled. "Thank you, Maya, for letting me be part of this." Maya didn't say anything right away. She looked at the mural, at Karen, and then finally said, "See you tomorrow, Mrs. Whitman." Karen's heart swelled at the simple acknowledgement. See you tomorrow, Maya. As she left the art center that evening, Karen realized that each day she spent here wasn't just about making amends. It was about learning, growing, and becoming someone better, and that was a process she was ready to see through to the end. Karen arrived at the Brooksville Community Art Center the next morning with a renewed sense of purpose. The air was crisp, tinged with the scent of fallen leaves, and the early sun cast long golden rays through the trees. As she stepped through the entrance, she noticed how familiar it felt now. The smell of paint, the faint hum of chatter, the energy of creativity. She spotted Maya almost immediately, kneeling in front of the mural panel, already hard at work. The tree at the heart of the mural had grown richer, deeper with color overnight, its branches stretched outward, intertwining with soft silhouettes of people, figures of all shapes and sizes, reaching for one another, their hands outstretched in unity. Karen set her bag down and approached. "Morning, Maya," she said softly. Maya looked up briefly, her face calm but focused. "Morning." There wasn't much more to say, and that was fine. Karen picked up her brush, dipped it into a soft green paint, and began filling in the leaves. The steady, repetitive motion grounded her, the sound of bristles scratching against wood oddly soothing. Around them, other kids buzzed with quiet excitement as they painted. Janet moved between groups, offering tips and encouragement. Karen had expected to feel out of place, but instead, she felt included. Slowly, she was beginning to see herself as part of something bigger than her own quiet, isolated world. About an hour later, Maya stood and stretched, wiping her hands on her paint-streaked jeans. "I need to get something from my bag," she mumbled, before heading toward the back of the room. Karen paused her work to admire the progress. The mural was becoming more vibrant, more alive with every stroke. As she studied the details, her eyes fell on a small figure near the base of the tree, a girl sitting on a bench, her shoulders hunched, her outline faint but deliberate. Karen's breath caught in her throat. It was her, or at least it was a representation of that moment in the park, the moment she had made Maya feel like a shadow. The faint, lonely figure was a stark contrast to the rest of the mural, where the silhouettes reached for each other, connected and whole. She felt a knot tighten in her stomach. She had come here to make amends, but the reality of her mistake was staring her right in the face. For Maya, art wasn't just about beauty, it was truth, and Karen saw herself reflected in that truth. "Karen?" Janet's voice broke through her thoughts. Karen blinked and turned to see the art center's director standing beside her, a kind expression on her face. "You all right?" Janet asked gently. Karen swallowed and nodded. "I'm fine, She gestured to the mural. "Maya's work is incredible." Janet smiled fondly. "She's got a way of seeing things most people miss. That's what makes her art so powerful." She paused, studying Karen carefully. "But powerful art can also be uncomfortable, can't it?" Karen looked away, ashamed. "Yes, it can." Janet placed a hand on Karen's shoulder, her touch gentle. "Maya's letting you be here for a reason. She's giving you a chance. You just have to keep showing up." Karen nodded, her resolve returning. "I will." Later that afternoon, as the group cleaned up for the day, Karen spotted Maya sitting alone near one of the windows, sketchpad in hand. The late sunlight streamed in, framing her in a golden glow as her pencil moved across the page. Karen hesitated, unsure whether to approach, but something in her urged her forward. "Mind if I sit?" Karen asked softly, motioning to the chair across from her. Maya glanced up, shrugged, and gestured for her to sit. For a moment, Karen watched Maya sketch. The drawing was already taking shape, a pair of hands clasping together beneath a sprawling tree. It was hopeful, yet quiet. "Your art really is beautiful, Maya," Karen said sincerely. It says so much. Maya didn't look up. That's the point. Karen swallowed, choosing her words carefully. I saw the figure on the bench in the mural, she admitted, the one near the tree. Maya's pencil paused for the briefest moment before she continued sketching. And? I think I understand it, Karen said softly. Or at least, I'm starting to. You felt like you didn't belong, like you were invisible. Maya finally looked up, her dark brown eyes meeting Karen's. You made me feel that way, she said bluntly. There was no malice in her voice, just honesty. But it's not just you. It happens all the time. People look at me and assume they know who I am. Karen nodded, shame rising in her chest. You're right. I did that. I looked at you and saw what I wanted to see instead of who you really are. Maya studied her for a long moment before speaking again. Why are you really here, Mrs. Whitman? The question surprised Karen. What do you mean? Maya's voice was calm but firm. Are you here because you feel guilty? Or because you actually want to change? Karen stared at her, taken aback by the question's clarity. It was a question she had been too afraid to ask herself. I think it's both, Karen admitted finally. I do feel guilty. I hate what I did to you. But being here, seeing your art, hearing what it means to you, it's made me realize how much I need to change, not just for you, but for myself too. Maya's gaze softened, just slightly. Good, she said quietly, because showing up isn't enough if you don't mean it. Karen nodded, the truth of Maya's words settling deep in her chest. I mean it, she promised, and I'll keep showing up, no matter how long it takes. For the first time, a real smile tugged at Maya's lips. It was small, but it was there. Okay, she said simply. That evening, as Karen drove home, she felt a strange mixture of emotions, hope, guilt, and determination swirling together. Maya's words echoed in her mind. Showing up isn't enough if you don't mean it. Karen thought of the mural, of the shadowy figure on the bench, and of the hands reaching for one another among the branches. It wasn't just Maya's story, it was everyone's story. A story about isolation, about connection, about belonging, and Karen was beginning to see where she fit into it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the world in hues of orange and purple, Karen whispered to herself, I'll keep showing up. Because for the first time in her life, she truly understood what that meant. The following week brought with it a rhythm Karen hadn't felt in years, something new yet familiar, as if she were both a stranger and a participant in her own life. Every morning she showed up at the Brooksville Community Art Center to help with the mural project, determined to prove to herself and to Maya that she was here for the right reasons. The mural was transforming. Each day, new layers of paint brought it closer to life. The tree's branches swelled with color, leaves turned to vivid green, and the figures, once faint sketches, took shape as bold silhouettes of people intertwined, connected, yet distinct. Karen felt a growing pride in the work, even in the small contributions she made. Janet kept her busy painting backgrounds and filling in soft gradients, jobs that required patience but little skill. The kids teased her kindly, calling her the world's best base coder, and though it was light-hearted, it made her feel included. Most of all, Karen observed Maya. The girl led with a quiet confidence that drew people in, her directions thoughtful, her vision clear. Every stroke of her brush carried intention, and though Maya didn't speak much to Karen, their silences became less heavy, less strained. The shadowy figure Karen had seen, the girl on the bench, had grown more defined now, but something had changed. A thin branch of the tree extended toward the figure, as if reaching for her, pulling her into the light. Karen hadn't asked Maya about it, but she noticed the shift. It gave her hope. One afternoon, while the group took a break, Karen sat at the far end of the art center, wiping paint off her hands. She watched as Maya and a group of teens huddled together, laughing at something one of the boys had said. Seeing Maya smile, a real smile, felt like a small victory in itself. "Can I ask you something?" Karen turned to see Janet approaching, holding 2 cups of coffee. She handed one to Karen and sat beside her. "Of course," Karen said, accepting the coffee gratefully. Janet took a sip, her gaze thoughtful. "Why did you really come back here? After everything?" Karen hesitated, staring down into her cup. The question mirrored what Maya had asked days before, but it still caught her off guard. "I wanted to make things right," Karen admitted finally. "I thought apologizing would be enough, but it wasn't. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it, and being here, helping with this mural, has made me see how much I need to change, how much I've missed by keeping my world so small." Janet nodded, her expression kind. "It takes courage to admit that." Karen sighed. "I thought I knew who I was, a good person, someone who cared about her community. But that day in the park, it showed me a side of myself I didn't want to see. I judged Maya without even knowing her. I made her feel small, invisible." Janet set her cup down, folding her hands in her lap. "We all have blind spots, Karen. What matters is what we do once we see them. You're here. You're trying. That's more than a lot of people do." Karen looked over at the mural, at the sprawling branches reaching toward the faint silhouettes of people. "Maya's art is something else. It's like she sees the world in ways the rest of us don't." Janet smiled. "She does. But you know what? I think she's starting to see you too." Karen looked at Janet, surprised. "You think so?" "She wouldn't have let you stay this long if she didn't," Janet said simply. "Maya doesn't waste her time on people who don't mean what they say." Karen glanced back at Maya, who was sketching something new on her notepad, her brow furrowed in concentration. The thought that Maya might be starting to trust her, even just a little, filled Karen with a quiet, unfamiliar warmth. And the next day, Karen arrived at the art center to find the group buzzing with excitement. Janet stood at the front of the room, clapping her hands to get everyone's attention. "All right, everyone, we're heading to the park today," Janet announced. "The mural panels are ready to be installed. Let's pack up and get moving." Karen's stomach fluttered. This was it, the moment they had all worked toward. She glanced at Maya, who was already gathering her supplies with the other kids, her focus sharp. Karen approached her hesitantly. "Need any help?" Maya looked up, surprised, then nodded. "Yeah, grab the brushes and paint cans. We'll need them for touch-ups once the panels are up." Karen smiled. "On it." The group arrived at Brooksville Park just after noon. The sun hung high in the clear blue sky, and a soft breeze rustled the golden leaves overhead. Karen stood back and watched as the teens unloaded the mural panels, working together to carefully carry them toward the installation site near the old oak trees. The park looked different to Karen now. She remembered standing here just a week ago, phone in hand, making a call she would regret for the rest of her life. Now, as she watched Maya and the others work, the space felt renewed. Janet clapped her hands together. "All right, team, let's get these panels up." The mural installation took hours. Karen helped where she could, holding panels steady, handing out brushes, cleaning up stray paint. Slowly but surely, the tree came to life on the wooden boards. Its branches stretched out across all 3 panels, weaving together silhouettes of people. Children, adults, families, all connected by the roots of the sprawling tree. At the center of it all, beneath the canopy of leaves, was the bench. The shadowy figure that had once looked so small and isolated was now surrounded by the other figures, the light of the tree reaching her, embracing her. Karen stood back, her heart swelling. She turned to Maya, who was inspecting the final panel with a critical eye. "It's beautiful, Maya," Karen said softly. Maya turned, her expression softer than Karen had ever seen it. "Yeah," she said quietly, It is. They stood together in silence, watching as the sunlight filtered through the real trees and danced across the mural. Karen felt the weight of everything she had done, everything she had tried to repair, settle in her chest. "You changed the figure on the bench," Karen said after a moment. Maya glanced at her, a small smile playing on her lips. "I did." "Why?" Maya looked back at the mural, her voice steady. "Because people can change." Karen's breath caught in her throat. She turned to Maya, who met her gaze with something that looked almost like forgiveness. "Thank you, Maya," Karen whispered. Maya shrugged, but her smile remained. "You showed up," she said simply. "That's a start." As Karen looked at the mural, at the branches stretching outward, at the figures connecting, at the shadow that had turned to light, she realized that Maya wasn't just talking about the art, she was talking about them, and for the first time in years, Karen felt like she truly belonged. The mural unveiling was scheduled for a sunny Saturday afternoon, and the entire town of Brooksville seemed to show up. Families gathered with picnic blankets, children ran between the trees, and the hum of conversation filled the crisp autumn air. There was excitement in the atmosphere, the kind that only comes when a community comes together to celebrate something meaningful. Karen arrived early, clutching a basket of homemade cookies, a gesture that felt small but heartfelt. She was no longer concerned with how people might look at her or whisper behind her back. Today wasn't about her. It was about the mural, about Maya, and about the people who had created something beautiful from so many hands, so many voices. As she walked toward the mural site, Karen felt her breath catch. The 3 panels had been fully installed, and the sunlight played across their surface as if the park itself approved of the masterpiece. The tree stood strong and proud at the center of the design, its branches reaching out and interweaving with the silhouettes of people. Hands held hands, roots connected beneath the ground, and the shadowy figure on the bench, once faint and isolated, was now fully illuminated, her form surrounded by light and the outstretched hands of others. She no longer sat alone. The message of the mural was clear. Belonging was something we built together. Karen felt her eyes sting with tears as she studied the final details. Maya stood a few feet away, talking with Janet and some of the other teens. Karen hesitated before approaching, but when she did, Maya looked up and offered her the faintest of smiles. It wasn't forced. It was real. "You made it," Maya said. "Of course," Karen replied. "I wouldn't miss it for the world." Maya nodded and turned her gaze back to the crowd gathering around the mural. She seemed more confident today, like she belonged exactly where she stood, and Karen couldn't help but admire her quiet strength. "You've done something incredible here, Maya," Karen said sincerely. "This mural, it's going to mean so much to so many people. It already does to me." Maya looked at her, her expression thoughtful. "It's not just my work," she replied. "Everyone helped. Janet, the other kids, you, even if you were just painting the base coat." Karen laughed softly. "World's best base coater, I've heard." Maya smiled faintly, and for the first time, there was no hesitation in her voice when she said, "You did good, Mrs. Whitman." "I mean it." Karen's heart swelled. "Thank you, Maya. That means more than you know." They stood together for a moment, watching as the town gathered closer, admiring the mural. Janet stepped forward to address the crowd, her voice amplified by a small microphone. "Thank you all for coming," Janet began, her voice warm and welcoming. "This mural is a gift to our town, a symbol of belonging, growth, and community. It was created by the young artists of Brooksville, led by Maya Johnson, who brought her incredible vision to life." The crowd erupted into applause, and Karen watched as Maya shifted slightly, clearly unused to the attention. But when Janet motioned for her to come forward, Maya stepped up with a quiet confidence that spoke volumes. "This mural is about all of us," Maya said into the microphone, her voice calm but steady. "It's about how we're all connected, even when we don't always see it. I hope it reminds people that everyone has a place, no matter where you're from, what you look like, or who you are." Karen watched in awe as the crowd cheered again, louder this time. Maya stepped back, her cheeks flushed, but she was smiling. Idur Singi. After the ceremony, people milled about the park, taking pictures and talking excitedly about the mural. Karen found herself standing off to the side, watching as families and children admired the artwork. A small group of people approached her, neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years. "Karen," said Donna, her longtime neighbor, smiling warmly, "I heard you were helping with this project. You've been spending a lot of time at the art center?" Karen nodded, feeling a strange mix of pride and humility. "Yes, I have. I'm learning a lot." "It's a beautiful mural," Donna said, glancing at the panels. "And it's good to see you here, Karen." "Really?" Karen swallowed the lump in her throat and smiled. "Thank you." One by one, others came by, some to compliment the mural, others to talk about how much the park had changed for the better. Karen realized something profound. People weren't looking at her with judgment anymore. They saw her as someone who had tried to make amends, someone who had shown up and kept showing up. As the day wound down, the crowd thinned, and the golden light of the afternoon gave the park a warm, tranquil glow. Karen found herself sitting on that bench, the very one where everything had begun. It felt like a full circle, though the weight in her chest was no longer shame. It was something softer. "Looks better with the mural behind it, doesn't it?" Karen turned to see Maya standing nearby, holding her sketch pad. "It does," Karen agreed, smiling up at her. "It's amazing how something can change so much in just a week." Maya nodded and sat down beside her, a comfortable silence stretching between them. "Are you proud of it?" Karen asked after a while. Maya looked at the mural, her dark eyes reflecting the sunlight. "Yeah, I am." Karen hesitated, then said softly, "I'm proud of you too, Maya. For what it's worth." Maya didn't look at her, but Karen noticed the small smile on her lips. "Thanks." They sat there for a moment longer, the sounds of the park drifting around them, the laughter of children, the rustling of leaves, the faint hum of conversation. For the first time, Karen didn't feel like an outsider in her own town. She felt like she belonged. As Maya stood to leave, she glanced back at Karen and said, "See you around, Mrs. Whitman." Karen smiled, her heart lighter than it had been in years. "See you around, Maya." As she watched Maya walk away, sketchpad in hand, Karen looked once more at the mural, the tree, the figures, the light. It was a reflection of what they had built together: connection, understanding, and hope. And in that moment, Karen knew this wasn't the end of her journey. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where she would keep showing up, keep listening, and keep growing. Because belonging wasn't about where you started, it was about where you chose to stand. And today, Karen Whitman chose to stand with her community,